Welcome back to my channel, where we bring to life the most haunting stories that blur the line between the living and the dead. Tonight, I'll take you deep into the shadowed hallways of a hospital where not all souls rest peacefully. When I started working as a night shift nurse, I thought the hardest part would be the patients, the emergencies, the blood, the chaos. But what truly haunted me was the silence. Behind the sterile walls of St. Helena Medical Center, something watched me. Something whispered my name. I thought I had seen spirits before, but this was something older, something darker, something that doesn't just haunt, it feeds. This is the story of my first duty and the shadows that never said goodbye. When I was younger, fear used to choke me in my sleep. I'd lie awake at night in Romblon, under a thin mosquito net, pretending I didn't hear the slow, dragging footsteps outside our nipa hut, or the whispering voices under the floorboards, or the shadow of something, crouching beside the kapok tree at midnight, unmoving but watching. My grandmother told me it was just the wind, or wild dogs, or dreams. But dreams don't follow you into the morning. Shadows don't watch you brush your teeth. Over time, I stopped reacting. I told myself I was imagining things, that fear was childish, that if I ignored the things I saw, they would go away. I believed that until the day I stepped foot into St. Helena Medical Center, a small, private hospital tucked at the edge of Quezon City. Too quiet, too clean, the kind of building where every hallway echoes like a prayer left unanswered. It was my first night shift, my first real job as a nurse. I was early, eager, holding tightly to my clipboard like a talisman. I wore new shoes that squeaked slightly with each step and a smile that I hoped would make up for my nerves. I remember the moment I crossed the threshold into that hospital. The air changed. It wasn't just the chill of the AC. It was heavier, thicker, like something unseen was already waiting, watching. The receptionist barely glanced up. The hall lights flickered once, then steadied. I passed by the chapel room and felt an urge to pray. Not because I was devout, but because something inside me whispered, "You'll need it." That was when I saw him, an old man standing near the emergency entrance, not moving, not speaking. He was tall, though hunched, with yellowed skin stretched tightly over sharp cheekbones. He wore a barong Tagalog, crisp but stained at the bottom with what looked like dried rust. His hair was gray, slicked back, yet his face had a strangely expressionless calm. But his eyes were all wrong. They were too clear, too bright, like glass filled with stagnant rainwater, and they were fixed directly on me. "Excuse me, Pa," I said softly and moved closer. He was blocking the hallway. Instinctively, I reached out to guide him aside, and I touched him. Only I didn't. What I felt wasn't skin. It was cold, thick, suffocating cold. Not the kind from an air vent, but the kind you feel in the back room of a funeral parlor. Cold that seeps through your bones and settles inside your lungs. I yanked my hand back. My breath caught in my throat. Still, the old man stared. For a terrifying moment, I couldn't move. We locked eyes, and I felt as if the world around us stilled. His pupils seemed to expand, darkening the whites of his eyes until they became bottomless holes. Couldn't look away. I didn't dare blink. I don't know who broke the gaze first, but when I finally looked down and then glanced back up, he was gone. No footsteps, no rustling, just gone. My entire body was frozen in place until someone called my name behind me. "Luisito." I turned. It was Zach, my childhood friend. We grew up in Romblon together, played along the rice paddies, shared ghost stories over warm tejo. He was the only one who knew about my gift. He saw it himself once, when we were 15 and a shadow in the shape of a woman stood behind my reflection in the river. "You okay?" he asked. "You look like you saw, well, something." I opened my mouth but lied instead. "I think I forgot my tumbler." He frowned. "You're holding it." I looked down. Zach didn't push. He never did. "Come on." First shift's always rough, especially in a place like this. I followed him inside. The hospital was eerily quiet despite the hour. A few patients rested in dimly lit rooms. The overhead lights buzzed. The hum of an old vending machine echoed louder than it should have. But the worst part was the feeling, that pressure, like someone or something was standing just behind your shoulder, breathing faintly. I told myself it was just nerves, that I'd adjust, that I always had. Then I saw him again. The old man was standing near the emergency room once more. This time he wasn't looking at me. He was staring down the hallway like he was waiting for someone to come around the corner. I blinked, stepped back, pretended to read my clipboard. He didn't move, didn't blink. And when I looked again, he was no longer there. This happened again the next night, and the night after. He would appear in different places, by the elevator, near the janitor's closet, once even at the far end of the ICU hallway. Always standing, always silent, always watching. Sometimes I would pass through a hallway and feel the air change. Cold would sweep over me. The hairs on my arms would rise, and I knew he had just been there, or was about to appear. I wanted to ignore it. I tried to rationalize, but I knew what I was seeing. I'd lived with the gift long enough to recognize a spirit. What terrified me was how present he was. He wasn't a fleeting vision or a passing shadow. He was there, solid, watching with intent. One evening, as I was logging patient charts, Zach slid beside me. "You've been quiet, and you keep glancing at the ER entrance." I nodded. "You saw him again?" "Yes." "Same old man?" "Yes." He leaned in. "You know, there's a rumor about that guy." My skin prickled. "They say a man died right there at the ER entrance about 10 years ago. He wasn't even a patient. He just collapsed. Someone said he had a stab wound straight to the heart. Died before they could get him inside." I turned to Zach. "Did anyone ever get his name?" He nodded slowly. "Mang Gregorio. Some say he was an albulario." My breath caught. An albulario, a folk healer, spiritual protector. The old ways. The kind who could see what others couldn't. The kind who knew how to fight what lurked in the dark. Suddenly, everything felt heavier. Was he still here for a reason? Later that night, something happened that changed everything. It was near 3 a.m. The hospital was still. Even the security guard had dozed off at his post. I was restocking bandages when I heard something. A voice, but not like a person calling down a hallway. It was right behind my ear. Hot, wet, angry. "Luyuyuyasiyu." I froze. The voice was deep, twisted, like it came from something that hadn't had vocal cords in years. It wasn't Gregorio. I turned sharply. No one there, but I felt it. That cold again. But this time there was weight behind it, like invisible hands pressing on my chest. I stumbled forward, heart racing, and sprinted to the nurse's station. But no one else had heard it. "You're just tired," said my supervisor. No, I knew exhaustion. This was different. This was intentional. Something had spoken my name. Something angry. And somehow it knew exactly where I'd be. That night, I didn't go home. I sat in the staff lounge until sunrise, salt packet clenched in my palm, crucifix in my other hand, afraid to blink. Afraid the next time I did, it wouldn't just be Gregorio watching. I tried to forget something else had arrived. I told myself and it had just begun to notice nation. Maybe an echo through the vents, or my subconscious playing tricks after seeing Gregorio too many times. But none of those explanations sat right. I wasn't just scared, I was being warned. Or worse, marked. The following days passed in a haze of salt packets, whispered prayers, and sleepless mornings. I started dreading the silence, jumping at every flicker of the hallway lights or the mechanical hum of the ventilators. But no one else seemed to feel it. The other nurses went about their duties with the calm indifference of people who didn't know what haunted the edges of their world. They didn't flinch at cold spots. They didn't stare into corners too long. They didn't hear their names called by voices that didn't exist. I was alone, except for Zach. "I believe you," he told me one night as we sat near the back corridor, drinking stale coffee from the vending machine. "Even about the voice?" I asked, voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. He nodded. "That wasn't Gregorio." "I know," I said. "Gregorio doesn't speak. He watches. He waits. But this other thing, it hates me. Zach stared at the floor for a long time, then said, maybe we're looking at it wrong. Maybe Gregorio isn't the danger. I tilted my head. What do you mean? He leaned in. What if he's not haunting you? What if he's protecting you? I wanted to laugh, but something about that idea took root and refused to leave. The way Gregorio never got close. The way he always stood still, watching, yes, but never interfering. And that look in his eyes. It was cold, sure, but not malevolent. It was focused, and that made me remember something. A detail I had buried under my fear. That night, when the voice called my name, there had been a shift in the air just before. A momentary chill. And then, Gregorio appeared. Not behind me, but ahead of me, down the hallway, like he was placing himself between me and whatever was coming. I hadn't seen him since that night. It was almost worse. I told Zach everything. About the cold, the voice, the weight. He listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. Then he said something I'll never forget. You know, there's a kind of soul that doesn't pass on because it's waiting. For what? For someone, or something. 3 nights later, I saw Gregorio again. It was around 2:20 a.m. I had just finished checking on a patient in room 204 and was walking past the emergency hallway when I stopped dead in my tracks. There he was, again, standing. But this time, he was facing away from me. He was looking toward a corner of the corridor. The wall there was bare. No room, no door, just a blank plastered surface with peeling beige paint. Nothing unusual, but Gregorio wasn't just facing it. He was staring at it, like he expected it to open. And then he did something new. He raised his hand, slowly, shakily, toward the wall, like reaching for something that wasn't there. A shiver ran down my back. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then he turned, as if he sensed me. Our eyes met again. Only this time, he didn't vanish. He nodded. Then he pointed firmly to that corner wall and disappeared. I ran to the wall. It was solid, just drywall, old and flaking. But when I placed my palm on it, I felt that same unnatural cold, that pressure. I knew something had happened there, something the hospital didn't log in its records. I waited until my shift ended, then pulled Zach aside and told him everything. To my surprise, he didn't dismiss it. Instead, he looked like he'd been expecting it. That corner used to be a doorway, he said. What? Before the renovations. That wall was once an entrance to room 207. But after the fire, they sealed it off. Didn't want patients seeing the scorch marks. A fire? I asked. No one told me anything about a fire. Zach nodded grimly. Not many people know. It was covered up. A short circuit in the monitor cables caused a spark. Oxygen leak made it worse. Room 207 went up like a funeral pyre. 3 people died. One of them was a child. A chill swept through me. Was Gregorio one of them? He shook his head. No, he died years later. But what? Zach hesitated. I overheard the old records staff talking once. Gregorio was seen in the hospital just hours before that fire. He came in through the ER, said he was looking for a patient, said the child was in danger. No one listened. I felt my mouth go dry. And the child? He nodded slowly. Didn't make it. That night, I walked the halls again, past room 204, toward the sealed-off wall, and I heard crying. Soft, childlike, desperate. It was coming from the wall. I pressed my ear to the plaster. The cries were muffled, but clear. Not a baby, but a little girl, pleading, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. Over and over. Please, please. I stepped back, heart pounding. Gregorio, I whispered. He didn't appear, but the crying stopped. I went to the nurse's archive. I searched through the outdated records, through folders that were meant to be shredded years ago. I looked for room 207, for anything about a child, and I found her, Rosalind A. Banas, age 6. Died in the fire. Listed cause of death, smoke inhalation. Her room number, 207. Time of death, 2:27 a.m. The same time I had seen Gregorio staring at the wall. something clicked in my chest. A horrible, suffocating realization. Gregorio was waiting, not for someone to arrive, but for someone to leave. He was waiting for Rosalind. Her soul was still trapped. And that voice, that malicious, twisted voice I had heard, it wasn't just tormenting me. It was keeping her there. I started to believe what Zach had said, that Gregorio wasn't haunting the hospital. He was guarding it. And Rosalind, that little girl, she wasn't alone behind that wall. She was trapped with something worse than death, something that knew my name. The moment I read Rosalind's name on the old records, I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep again. Not without hearing her cries echo behind the walls. Not without remembering Gregorio's hollow stare, his outstretched hand, the way he vanished after pointing to the sealed-off corner where room 207 used to be. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was asking for help. But what could I do? I wasn't an exorcist. I wasn't an albulario. I was a nurse who cried during horror movies and said my nightly prayers out of habit, not faith. Still, something in me had changed. Maybe it was guilt, or fear, or some kind of quiet knowing that the longer I ignored it, the worse it would get. That wall was not just a sealed-up room. It was a prison. And whatever was trapped inside wasn't staying quiet anymore. It started with the smell, a burnt scent, faint but sour, like plastic melted into flesh. It would drift through the hallways at night, clinging to bedsheets and nurse uniforms. No one else seemed to notice, but I did. Then came the black smoke. It first appeared on the third night after I found Rosalind's file. I was returning from the med storage room with a tray of syringes when I saw it, curling along the base of the hallway floor like a snake made of ash. It wasn't thick, not at first, just a line of shifting blackness, hugging the walls, creeping forward. I stopped, watched, my breath shallow. It didn't behave like normal smoke. It moved with purpose, with direction, as if it were sniffing the air, searching. And then it vanished, slipping under the crack of a door near the stairwell. Room 211. Empty. I didn't follow it. Couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. But it didn't end there. The next night, I was assisting in the pediatric ward when a child screamed so loud it silenced the entire floor. I rushed to the room with another nurse, expecting a seizure or night terror. What we found was a 3-year-old girl curled under her blanket, eyes wide, mouth trembling. She said there was a monster, the mother whispered, rocking her daughter back and forth. She said it had no face and smoke came out of its arms. I felt the blood drain from my face. Later, I asked Zach to check the CCTV feeds for the hallway outside room 207. He agreed, hesitantly, and we huddled over the grainy monitor in the back office, rewinding footage past 2 a.m. At 2:22 a.m., the camera glitched, briefly. Then, the screen darkened, not all the way, but like a shadow had crawled over the lens. And for 4 seconds, a figure stood in front of the sealed wall. Not Gregorio. This one was larger, distorted, almost like the image itself was trying not to capture it fully. His body shimmered with static. His arms were too long. His head twitched every half second, like it couldn't stay anchored in reality. Then it was gone. Zach turned to me, pale. "That's not human." I said nothing, because I had seen that figure before in my dream the night prior. In that dream, I was standing alone in the emergency hallway. The lights were out, the air was thick, and something crawled on the ceiling, upside down, face hanging inches from mine. The skin wasn't skin. It was smoke stitched into the shape of a person. And its mouth was a gaping hole, from ear to ear, filled with flickering embers. It whispered my name the same way the voice had before. Slow, cruel, delighted. When I woke up, my pillow was soaked in sweat and my neck had 3 long scratches on it. Thin, red, and burning. I decided to investigate room 211, the one the smoke had slipped into that first night. It was daytime when I went in. Bright, the kind of light that made you feel falsely safe. The room was empty, scheduled for cleaning. No patients, no staff. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The temperature dropped, instantly. and the light from the hallway didn't quite reach the far corners of the room. It was as if the walls themselves drank it in. I placed a small bowl of water near the window, remembering something my Lola once told me, that spirits distort energy, and water reveals what the eye cannot. I stepped back, watched. The water began to ripple, slow at first, then violently, as if something had slammed the table. And then the reflection changed. Instead of showing the empty room, the water showed a burning bed, a child screaming, smoke pouring from vents, hands pounding on a sealed wall. I stumbled back, knocking over the bowl. The vision ended, but not the fear. Behind me, the air crackled. I turned. The black smoke had returned. Only this time, it didn't slither. It charged. It rushed toward me like a wave of ash and glass. I ran, slipping on the wet tiles, heart hammering. I screamed, but no sound came out. My throat was stuck, like hands were gripping it from the inside. I made it to the hallway, barely, and turned back. Nothing, just empty air. The corridor was quiet again, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But the scratches on my neck had opened. Thin streams of blood ran down to my collar. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just haunting. Could hurt. That night, I told Zach everything. About the vision in the water, the smoke, the scratches. His face went hard. "We have to do something," he said. "You can't keep going through this alone." "I'm not," I said quietly. "I think Gregorio's helping me." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time we talk to him." We waited for the hallway to clear. Past 3 a.m., we returned to the sealed wall. I brought salt. Zach brought a candle and a small prayer book. He wasn't religious, but desperate people pray when science fails. We stood in front of the corner, hands shaking. "Gregorio," I whispered, "if you can hear me, we're listening." Nothing. Then a chill swept through the corridor. Lights flickered. The flame of the candle turned blue, and Gregorio appeared. Not suddenly. He stepped forward from the wall, like he had always been part of it. His face was grim. His barong was dirtier than before. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. Zach dropped the book. I stood frozen. "Rosalind," I whispered. "You're waiting for her, aren't you?" He nodded once. "What's keeping her?" Gregorio looked past me, and I turned to follow his gaze. The black smoke had returned, but this time it wasn't shapeless. It was forming. A body, a face, twisted, half-melted, screaming silently. Gregorio stepped forward, placing himself between us and it. Then he said the first and only word I'd ever hear from his mouth. "Kali." The black smoke shrieked, not with sound, but with force. It blasted through the corridor, knocking lights out, rattling doors. Gregorio held firm. But I knew then this wasn't a ghost. It was something else. Something older. Something that wanted Rosalind not just dead, but devoured. And now that we were interfering, it wanted us too. When Gregorio said the name, Callie, it didn't just echo in my ears. It settled in my chest like poison. I didn't know what it meant. Not then. But I felt it. Like the name itself had weight. Like the moment he spoke it, something ancient turned its eyes toward us. And the hospital felt it too. From that night on, St. Elena changed. The air grew heavier. The temperature in certain corridors dropped by 10 degrees, even during the day. Lights flickered in synchronized patterns, not random, like Morse code from beyond. Patients complained of seeing people in their rooms at night, people who vanished when the nurses arrived. One elderly woman pointed to the ceiling and said, "They're whispering up there, telling me to go with them." She died that morning. Even the chapel felt hollow, like the prayers were reaching no higher than the ceiling tiles. And through it all, the black smoke returned, again and again, never fully formed, always in the corner of the eye. A moving shadow, a hiss behind a closed door, a shape under a patient's bed. It didn't need to attack me to haunt me, but the worst part wasn't what I saw. It was what I heard. The voices began 3 nights after our encounter with Gregorio. I had just clocked in and was organizing supplies in the storage room when I heard the first one. Soft, hesitant, echoing between the walls. "Luisito, I froze. The voice was a woman's. Old. Familiar somehow. I turned. The room was empty. I shook it off, whispered a prayer, and went back to work. But the voice returned the next night. Different. A child this time. Don't forget me. The third night, it was multiple voices at once. Overlapping. Whispers crawling over each other like insects. I couldn't make out the words. Only the emotion behind them. Sorrow. Fear. Desperation. It was like the walls of the hospital had become thin, and the dead were trying to bleed through. I told Zach, "You need to protect yourself," he said. "Not just from Callie, but from whatever else is trapped here." He took me to a friend of his, Lola Remedios, a retired faith healer who lived 2 towns over. Her house smelled of smoke and guava leaves. She didn't flinch when I told her about Gregorio, or the girl behind the wall, or Callie's smoke. She just nodded. "There are many spirits in this world," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "Some are confused, some are angry, but the most dangerous ones, like the one you call Callie, they feed on the living by using the dead." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means he is not just haunting. He is harvesting, drawing in weaker souls, holding them, feeding off their pain, their memory, their longing. Like Rosalind," I whispered. Lola Remedios nodded. "He keeps her there, and the others too. Every death in that building, every lingering soul, it becomes fuel." "Then how do we stop him?" "You can't," she said simply. "Not yet. You are not ready." I swallowed my panic. "Then what can I do?" She handed me a vial of blessed oil and a pouch of powdered herbs. "Protect yourself. Do not speak to the voices unless they speak to you first. And never follow them if they call you by name." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to know. When I returned to the hospital that night, I felt it instantly. The silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the expectant kind. Like the building was holding its breath. I walked the halls slower than usual. Every sound echoed too loud. My footsteps felt like they were disturbing something. I clutched the pouch in my pocket tightly. Near the old corner where room 207 used to be, I saw a little girl standing by the wall. Not a spirit, a real girl, maybe 4 or 5. She looked lost, pale, dressed in a hospital gown too big for her. "Sweetheart," I asked gently. She didn't turn. She kept staring at the wall. I stepped closer, and then she spoke. "He says I'll be safe if I go inside." My skin turned to ice. "Who?" I whispered. She finally turned to look at me. It wasn't a child. It looked like one, but the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, too old. Then it smiled and vanished into the wall. I fell backward, landing hard on the floor. My breathing was ragged. I scrambled away, crawling until I reached the corner of the hallway. And that's when the chanting began. Came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Hundreds of voices, whispering in a language I didn't understand. Some were weeping, some were pleading, and one voice, louder than the rest, was laughing. Callie. His name didn't need to be spoken anymore. His presence was enough. Covered my ears. It didn't help. The chanting was inside me now. Then silence, and Gregorio appeared again. He stood before the wall, hands outstretched, eyes glowing faintly. And behind him, emerging slowly, was the outline of a door. Room 207, visible only to me. Gregorio looked at me and said, without speaking, "You must go in." I shook my head violently. I wasn't ready. Couldn't. He pointed again. "Now." And then the wall cracked. A deep, black fissure running through the plaster like a wound splitting open. Smoke poured out. And from within that smoke, I heard the clearest voice yet. "Help me, Kuya, Rosalind." I moved forward not by courage, but by something stronger. Responsibility. As I reached the wall, my fingers touched the blackened edge of the fissure, and the world shifted. The hallway melted away. The walls became soot-stained. The lights flickered to darkness, and I was inside room 207. But it was not the room it used to be. It was twisted, half-burned, half-whole, like a memory forced to relive its trauma over and over. A child's bed sat charred in the middle. Scorch marks climbed the walls like veins. The air smelled of burning hair and candle wax. And in the corner, curled up like a broken doll, was Rosalind. She looked up at me. Her eyes were full of tears. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Behind her, in the shadows, something stirred, something massive, and it grinned. The room trembled, or maybe it was just me. Shaking, shivering, teeth clenched as I stared into the blackness that pulsed behind Rosalind. She didn't speak, but I saw it in her eyes. Panic, as if something was closing in. The smoke gathered like storm clouds, thick and heavy, churning at the corners of room 207. A shape formed slowly in the dark. First, a hand, long, crooked fingers dragging sharp nails across the scorched floor. Then a shoulder. Then a head that seemed to tilt at an unnatural angle. When the face emerged from the shadows, I stopped breathing. It had no eyes, only black, empty sockets that leaked trails of ash. Its mouth was twisted into a permanent grin, stitched at the corners by what looked like burned threads. Its body was tall, too tall, scraping the ceiling as it moved forward like smoke solidified into muscle. And then, in a voice both hollow and monstrous, it spoke. "She is mine." I stepped in front of Rosalind without thinking, blocking her with my body. "You can't have her." Callie didn't laugh. It just stood there, as if amused by my audacity. The air in the room turned bitter. My skin burned with cold. Then the shadow lunged. Before I could react, a gust of hot wind knocked me backward, but I didn't hit the wall. I landed on something solid. Strong arms caught me. I looked up. Gregorio. He was no longer pale or ghost-like. His form shimmered faintly with golden threads, as though woven from both light and smoke. His barong was torn and blackened, but he stood tall, proud, eyes glowing with a quiet, ancient rage. He set me down gently and stepped between me and Callie. I didn't know what was about to happen, but every hair on my body stood on end. Gregorio raised his right hand, and in it was a dagger, not made of metal, but carved from bone. Its hilt was wrapped in red thread, and etched across the blade were old Bebean characters I couldn't understand. Callie roared. The room shook again, and then they collided. The air between them exploded with invisible force. Gregorio slashed downward. Callie countered with a swipe of its clawed arm, sparks of ash and light scattering like fireflies. The noise wasn't like a battle, it was like thunder inside my head. Rosalind screamed. I turned to shield her, pulling her against me. I could barely see the two forces clashing beyond the haze. Gregorio moved with purpose, every motion deliberate, guided by more than just instinct. He chanted words I couldn't hear, couldn't comprehend, but they made the air vibrate. Callie responded with pure violence, striking out with limbs that bent wrong, its body constantly shifting between smoke and flesh, as if it couldn't decide what it truly was. I saw Gregorio falter once. Callie struck him across the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. The light around him dimmed. His knees buckled. "No!" I shouted. Callie turned toward me. Its grin widened. "Take him," it whispered to no one. "Let him be next." And then, from the corners of the room, other shapes began to emerge, souls. Dozens of them. Men, women, children, all translucent, all flickering like candlelight, all bound in chains of smoke. The forgotten dead. Callie was summoning them, pulling them from the walls, the floors, the void, using their pain as weapons. Gregorio stood slowly. Blood, or something like it, ran from his mouth. Then he turned to me, his eyes locked onto mine. "Let them remember," he said. I didn't know what he meant until I heard the voices again. But these weren't whispers anymore. They were cries. The souls began to scream, not in pain, but in remembrance. Their memories bled into the room like floodwater. Flashes of lives once lived. A young boy playing with his Lolo. A mother giving birth in room 112. An old man praying in the chapel. Their humanity surged through the space, disrupting Callie's hold. Chains cracked. Smoke recoiled. The souls glowed brighter. Gregorio lifted the bone dagger and plunged it into the ground. A wave of light erupted, blinding and loud like the crash of 100 bells. Callie howled. Its body fractured, smoke pouring out from the cracks in its form. It lashed wildly, but its arms passed through the souls now standing between it and Rosalind. They were protecting her. No longer just echoes, no longer just victims. They were witnesses. Gregorio advanced one final time. He began to chant. Not in Latin, not in Tagalog, but in something older. Something from before memory. His voice was thunder. His eyes were fire. He reached out and gripped Callie's throat. And Callie, godless, cruel, ancient Callie, screamed. Tried to pull away, but Gregorio held tight. Your name is not power anymore, he growled. Your grip ends here. He drove the dagger deep into Callie's chest. The entity exploded into a storm of black mist. Shards of smoke twisted through the air before being swallowed into the ground. The walls screamed. The lights shattered. Then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was outside the room. The wall was whole again. No smoke. No door. Just a wall. Zach was beside me, holding my arm. You're back, he whispered. I looked around. The hallway was normal. The lights stable. No smoke. Gregorio was gone. But so was the pressure. The hospital felt lighter. I didn't know how long I had been inside. I didn't know how I got out. But I knew one thing. Callie was gone. And Rosalind, I turned. She was standing beside me. No longer a ghost, no longer weeping. She smiled. A real, peaceful smile. And then she faded, gently, like dust in sunlight. Free. Later that week, I visited the chapel. For the first time since I started working at St. Elena, I lit a candle without trembling. And as I watched the flame flicker, I felt something warm on my shoulder. A hand. I turned. There was no one there, but I knew. Gregorio had said goodbye. And the shadows? They were finally quiet. The silence that followed Callie's disappearance was unlike anything I'd known inside St. Elena Medical Center. It wasn't the tense hush of dread I had come to expect during night shifts, the kind that made you afraid to turn corners or check mirrors. The silence was clean, complete, like something poisonous had been siphoned out of the air. Still, I didn't fully trust it. Not yet. Not after everything I'd seen. Rosalind's final smile haunted me. Not because it was terrifying, but because it was peaceful. Pure. The kind of smile only a soul released from torment could wear. I returned to work 3 nights after the confrontation. My body was fine, but my mind hadn't caught up. I kept expecting the shadows to return. I carried the pouch of salt and the vial from Lola Remedios in my scrub pocket out of habit, even if part of me felt they weren't needed anymore. Zach met me at the nurse station with a quiet nod. No smoke last night, he said. No screaming patients. No shadows. I nodded. But the weird thing is, he continued, hesitating, some of the staff said they slept better for the first time in weeks. They don't know why, I said. They don't need to, he replied. Some blessings don't come with explanations. That night, I visited the hallway near the sealed room 207 again. Alone. The plastered wall looked no different than it had a week ago. Cracked in places, stained slightly with age. Just a wall. But it didn't pulse with cold anymore. It didn't breathe. Still, I stood there, waiting, hoping. Gregorio, I whispered. Are you still here? There was no answer. But I felt something. A gentle breeze, not cold, not biting, passed through the hallway, ruffling the edge of my uniform like a goodbye touch. And then, nothing. That was his farewell. No drama, no final words, just peace. The days that followed brought subtle change. The elevator that used to creak during night shifts, quiet. The ward where an elderly patient once claimed, "A man stands over my bed when I sleep," peaceful. Even the chapel felt brighter. The candles burned steadier. The scent of incense lingered longer. But perhaps the most telling change came from the children. 2 pediatric patients, both previously restless, both known for crying at night, slept soundly for the first time in months. When I checked on one of them, a boy named Inigo, he smiled sleepily and said, The little girl isn't crying anymore. I asked him, "What little girl?" "The one who used to sleep under my bed," he said casually. "She told me bye-bye last night." One evening, I sat on the hospital rooftop, looking out over the city lights, Manila flickering like fireflies across the dark. Zach joined me carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one. "So," he said, "do you think it's really over?" "I don't know," I said truthfully, "but it feels finished." He looked at me. "Do you feel different?" I thought about it, about all the nights I stood paralyzed in fear, about the voices in the walls, about Gregorio's eyes, filled with fire and grief, about Rosalind, about the other souls who screamed, then remembered who they were. "I feel like I've been changed," I admitted, "but not broken." Zach nodded slowly. "What was Callie?" he asked quietly. I took a long sip of the lukewarm coffee before answering. "I think he was what happens when pain is left to rot, when hatred festers too long, when the dead are forgotten." Zach was silent for a long while. Then he said, "And Gregorio?" I smiled faintly. "He was what happens when someone doesn't forget, even after death." A week later, the hospital administration announced renovations to the West Wing. I watched as workers knocked down the sealed wall where room 207 once stood. There was no ceremony, no hesitation, just sledgehammers breaking through layers of old concrete. Behind that wall, nothing. No bones, no room, just space and dust. They rebuilt it into a supply closet. I wondered, if I opened that new closet one night, would Rosalind be there? Would I hear the faint voice of a little girl asking to be remembered? But I didn't check. Some doors are better left closed. Lola Remedios visited the hospital 3 days before her death. She came quietly, unannounced, during visiting hours. I found her sitting on the bench outside the chapel, hands folded on her cane. "You did well," she said, without looking at me. I sat beside her. "Was it over?" I asked. She nodded. "For now. But the dead speak often in places where no one listens. That's why the living must carry the stories." She handed me something wrapped in old cloth. Inside was a small wooden figurine of a woman holding a child, carved with surprising detail. "For the girl," she whispered. "Place it somewhere safe." She passed away 2 nights later in her sleep, peacefully. I keep that figurine in my locker. Sometimes, before a long shift, I hold it in my hand and feel warmth. Sometimes, I still hear whispers, faint, like wind through old leaves. But they're no longer cries. They're stories. Stories of people who once breathed, once laughed, once feared the dark. Now they are free. And I know this. I will never forget them. Not Rosalind, not Gregorio, not the souls who never said goodbye. Because I saw them, I heard them, and I survived them.